So I thought maybe, well, I'll introduce you. This is my friend Laura, and Laura's decided to, or agreed to, come on my channel, which is Vicky Dis, which I've been doing a few recently on just kind of things I'm thinking about, what they're started. I think every single one's had a political slant on it without me realising. So I'm just going to go out there and do a political channel because that's the way it's going. So would you like to introduce yourself and some of it, because you've been involved in some awesome campaigns, even the Star Trek stuff, but all the important stuff as well. Obviously Star Trek's important, like not just at all, but you know, it's just, yeah, I don't know if you want to just kind of chat about some of the things that you're really proud to have been involved in.
So excuse me, I'm Laura, and I am a citizen of the Apache Nation, as well as being American. And the Star Trek thing, I'm on a steering committee to get a monument built for the future birthplace of Captain Janeway here in the town where I live, because this is the town where she's from. And I'm also involved in roller derby and with Team Indigenous Roller Derby, and we're a team of all Indigenous people. And so that's something else I'm really proud of. We were in the UK for the 2018 Roller Derby World Cup in Manchester, which was incredible. And I claimed England while I was there with a flag. So he helped me film
it. Yes, I filmed it. And it was glorious.
It was. So, yeah.
Specifically typed on my phone, but now I'm recording on my phone, I've not got it, but it's both of them are run as a house of two chambers in various ways. When it comes to yours is the House and the Senate, am I right?
Yeah, there's the House of Representatives and the Senate, and you know, the three branches of government are supposed to keep each other in check. They don't necessarily do a great job at that, but
yeah, I think we're both critical of current government structures and the way they're run at the moment. And weirdly, I think they're running quite parallel at the moment with really different issues, but so similar in some ways. I don't know how much you followed what I've been posting and what's going on over here, because America is very much in the media and all the politics is very much in the media all the time. Even your election process is so televised and so structured around the media, whereas ours isn't, but it's headed that way. So it's becoming more viewed and more like the debates are a new thing to this country. We've only been doing it the last 2 elections, we've had televised debates, whereas you guys have had them for years, you know. So yeah, now I need to actually start at the beginning, because my favorite thing to do is just jump right in at the middle and then make everything really confusing. So if I go first, I'll kind of overview our system, and then if you do the same, and then we'll start a bit of a discussion on that maybe. So, I mean, our political system in the UK is really deep rooted in history, and it has a lot, it's been developed very slowly over hundreds of years. And the big problem we're facing at the minute is it's a very archaic system that came out of medieval England when it was formed. I mean, our political system runs out of a palace, and you've seen that, obviously. It's an amazing building, and I think a lot of us are very proud of that building, but then when you realize the structure and how old it is, it's, I think modern society is running so fast now with media and technology and all the things, it's so outdated. And the problem in Britain that we have, and I suppose Americans have it in some way is that we have this culture that everything old is best and everything needs to be the way it was, and new things are really scary, so it's really hard to drag that into the future, and British people really struggle with that. You know, a lot of, at the minute, any changes suggested, everyone starts talking about the Second World War, but most people weren't there. And it's so bizarre that I don't know how it is with the war in your country, but honestly, in this country, the amount people talk about the war is crazy. And it's such a defining thing, you know, and you know, especially at the minute with the rise of fascism and the rise of the far right and the rise of a lot of hatred towards certain minorities, towards disabilities, towards anything that isn't very white middle class, is, you know, is quite scary. And I think that's definitely, you know, the Second World War was fighting against that in a lot of respects, in most respects, and it's crazy that that's kind of fought. But we have two chambers. We have the House of Commons, which was formed after Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century, created a representative system for people that was elected, although up until the 19th, you know, what, 20th century, it was very manipulated by lords and the aristocracy. They placed who they wanted to represent people. And there's been a lot of reform the last 100 years to try and make that more accountable, but we're still a first past the post system. So everyone in the country votes, and each area has one representative, and whoever gets the most votes automatically wins, although a majority of people may not have voted for that person. So it's a minority victory that ends up representing that area. And quite often, like where I am, there's only ever been the Conservative Party represented here. It's never ever changed. It's a very, very safe seat. So if they want a certain politician that doesn't live anywhere near here to be in Parliament, they send them to represent here and various other seats like it, because they know no matter what happens, no matter what the politician says or does or represents, they will always be elected in this area, because there's a lot of farmers and there's a lot of rural communities that really like that conservatism, and there's a lot of landowners, and landowners are scared of change, you know, so that happens. And that's a big frustration here, is that election system is the first past the post election system. And then we have the House of Lords, which up until 1999 was hereditary. So you had to be in the aristocracy to represent that, and you scrutinised all decisions. So anything that went through, they have to approve and amend before that's then given to the Queen, who then has to sign them off. But the Queen doesn't have a say. The Queen has no opinion. It's entirely ceremonial that she says yes. She's very, I think, maybe once in history has ever said no or sent something back, or you know, it's unheard of, basically. She'll say whatever. So it's completely pointless. It's so absurd. They even have, if somebody refuses to vote, they're chased to vote by a man with a sword, who chases after them with a real sword and forces them over a line to place a vote. And this is 2020. It's crazy. And it, you know, they've reformed it now, so 80% of the House of Lords is placed and chosen by the existing government or by other organisations, but we still have a selection of these peerage lords, and we also have representation with the church, which is crazy, because we do officially have a separation of church and country, but yet we have these seats for, you know, the hierarchy of the Church of England to sit in the House of Lords and have that say. So yeah, that's basically the overview of what you know, what goes on. How would you say that differs, or anything that you find interesting from your system?
So I think the thing we've got the Senate, and the Senate is where you have the same number of representatives from each state, and that doesn't include any of the territories that the U.S. has, because the U.S. does have like imperialist territories, and then you have the House of Representatives, which is determined by the population of the state, how many representatives there are. And it does include representation from some territories, and including the Cherokee Nation actually just sent representatives. That was part of their treaty, and they had never taken that before. They just recently started sending representatives, but they don't. Those from treaties and like the Cherokee Nation don't get the same votes that the states do, and because also the U.S. has this two-party system where there's technically other parties, but they rarely get voted in. It's really just comes down to these two parties. It's very partisan, and votes tend to fall along, party lines, and votes tend to fall. I mean, because people like to say that the United States is a democracy, but it's really not anymore. It's basically who's paying these representatives are getting the say, not the representatives. They're really not representing the people are supposed to be representing anymore. And the history of it, it was, this system was designed by people who had based it off of not only the English system, but they also had based a lot of it off of the Iroquois system and the Great League of Peace. And not a lot of people realize that, but a lot of the Constitution was taken from the Iroquois system. And and also just with the different branches and stuff, a lot of that came from the Iroquois system. So, but these people were writing this and saying all men are created equal while still owning people. And so they didn't actually mean all men were created equal. They meant all white men, And so instead of, and then they did make it in such a way that amendments could be added and those kind of things, which is good. But when they added amendments, there's still loopholes in all of the amendments. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery unless you're a prisoner. And, so they added these things, but instead of changing the system to include people, it was just sort of retrofitted to include people. And a lot of that is what is leading into what we're seeing happening right now in the United States. And the system is just broken all the way across. From the top where you have, the Electoral College, which has now, from teenage through adult life, gotten 2 presidents in. And for anybody who's not familiar with the Electoral College, it was a system that was put into place, early because, during the original states and colonies, we didn't have mass media like we have today. And, excuse me, sorry. So the people that were in charge believed that the average person was going to be less informed and just basically not smart enough to vote for their president. So the Electoral College is a system where everybody goes and votes, and then there are electoral people who go and vote. So when you vote for president in the United States, you're not actually voting for the president. The popular vote and the Electoral College vote can be completely separate. And both George Bush and Donald Trump have both lost the popular vote from the people, but still won by the Electoral College because each state has a number of electoral votes. And then they've further rigged it in their super delegates and delegates when it comes to electing the nominee for each party. Because more people voted in the Democratic primary in 2016 for Bernie Sanders than they did for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
But they decided that they wanted Hillary Clinton to be their representative and their nominee. So they put her in instead, and then she lost. And instead of just going by, okay, more people wanted this person, so we're going to put this person in, whether it was the nominee or whether it was the president, more individual people voted for Al Gore. More individual people voted for Hillary Clinton, yet George Bush and Donald Trump became the president. And you have people who argue against abolishing the Electoral College because they say large cities would be the ones deciding the election. But that doesn't make sense to me, because if every individual person gets one vote, large cities are where the population is concentrated. That doesn't mean the city is voting by individually as one city. It means every individual person in that city, each person's vote counts. And living in a conservative state, you know, I have often felt like my vote didn't count because I live in a state where I can vote for a left-leaning politician, but it's going to ultimately end up, my state is going to vote for the Republican candidate regardless. The only time I ever felt like my vote actually counted was in 2008 when I voted for Barack Obama, and Indiana went the Electoral College vote to a Barack Obama. And so that's frustrating for me, being a left-leaning person, to see that. And then seeing with this current election cycle and them now doing the same thing that they've done with the candidates and putting Joe Biden in, you know, and then, you know, most people didn't want Joe Biden, but they've decided to make him their man and put him in anyway. And that's incredibly frustrating as well. And, you know, they've, because of COVID, delayed the Indiana primary till next month. But I'm just like, part of me is even like, what's the point anymore? They've already decided who they want their candidate to be, so why should I even vote in the primary? Because if for the one I want, it's not going to matter. So it's just, it's I'm finding it so incredibly frustrating and tiresome at this point, because I do care deeply about politics, especially as an Indigenous person, and how that affects my community. But it feels like, because, you know, that's one of the things I look at when I look at a candidate is, what are their views on Indigenous issues? And it's just very tiresome at this point.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's this is where the parallels run, is I think the systems are completely different, but the problems are exactly the same. I mean, we don't vote for a leader, we vote for a party. And we don't have a say on who leads that party, only the party does. So none of us vote for a prime minister at all. We just get who they want to choose to run. And there's no vote for that at all, unless you're a member of that party. And I suppose we do have a couple of smaller parties that are more involved than the two systems, because we have Scotland with the SNP at the moment. And they are running the majority of Scotland. There's only 1 or 2 seats not in control of them. And then we have Northern Ireland, which refuse to sit in their own parliament at the minute, because half of them are nationalists who don't want the British Parliament to even exist, and the other half do, and and they can't sit down and get a quorum meeting. So they're functioning, but barely, but they're basically just dictated to by the English Parliament by default. And I say the English Parliament because it's run by a party only elected in England. They're not elected in the other countries. It's crazy that we have Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales being run by politicians that they didn't vote for.
Right.
You know, and yeah, I think that's incredibly frustrating. And we actually, the Conservative Party we're in at the moment, voted in a fixed term parliament where people weren't allowed to call early elections. And ironically, we've had 3 early elections within that period called for by them because they're falling apart at the minute and they can't. And I felt personally there's a dilution of talent at the top because of this process. I don't know anybody currently, 1 or 2 people who are actually running the government right now. There's a couple of well-known names, like 3, 4 people. The rest of them have all been brought in because nobody else will stand in the position right now. And they're all new politicians, you know, so a lot of people don't know who they are. And what's really crazy is during this COVID thing, they do a daily bulletin, and it isn't Boris Johnson that leads it. He sends other politicians in, and you've never heard, like the Transport Secretary is giving health advice on national television. And it's like, why are you not answering questions about transport policy, and do we need to hear that right now? You know, if it's relevant then fine, but it's crazy, you know. And the Home Secretary comes on and she's telling us, well, that it's not all bad news, there's been a reduction in shoplifting, and we're like, because the shops are closed. Of course there's a reduction, and you guys are leading this country. And I see this parallel with Donald Trump's administration, where they're coming out with things because they've just sat in a room and said, someone tell me something positive, and someone has, and no one's thought that that's not really a positive thing, because it doesn't make sense in current climates, you know. And I mean, I would say yours is far more absurd. Ours is a British watered down version of Donald Trump, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. He actually, and he's given this on interview, and a lot of people have said, when he goes up to camera, he ruffles his hair so that he looks a bit of a laughable, everyday character. And he does it intentionally, ruffles his hair so that he has this image. And he does that just as he walks on camera every single time, you know, and that's just, it's insane. And he has just failed. He was mayor of London before he was prime minister, and he failed and failed and failed and lost millions and was embroiled in scandals. Similar to Donald Trump, he's had lots of different affairs and accusations thrown at him, not quite to the level of Donald Trump, in a different way, but for a British prime minister, it's really surprising. But I find that the same with Donald Trump. Some of the stuff, you know, when you look at Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky situation, why isn't Donald Trump held to that same status and
Yeah.
ideals?
Well, and one of the things that I'm finding right now really mind-blowing is that you had would it bother you if I smoked on this? Okay, so one of the things I'm finding so mind-blowing right now is that you had all of these people, Democratic people, who, during the whole thing with the impeachment process and Donald Trump and the accusations, you know, saying believe women, and then now we have a woman who's comes forward about Joe Biden, and they're saying same things that the Republicans were saying when this was coming out about Donald Trump. Well, she can't be trusted, blah, 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 because it's their man who's being accused. Like, where's your believe women? Where's that now? You know, and that I'm finding incredibly frustrating, because, you know, you like, just because it's your guy,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, if you want to sit there and tell me we need to believe women, then let's believe women.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's something I'm finding just incredibly frustrating with this whole situation and this whole process, you know. And both Donald Trump and Joe Biden can barely string together two sentences.
Joe Biden.
It's incredibly just, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting because I feel a lot of people wanted Joe Biden because they felt no one would vote for a woman, and that he was the best option that would appeal to that core section of voters that need to follow a man. And ironically, we've had two female prime ministers who have both presented very male demeanor to get to where they were. And I wouldn't say, I mean, I've really disliked both of them very strongly. Even though they were women, what they represented wasn't very feminist. The way they dressed was very masculine. The way they spoke and presented themselves was quite masculine. And then you see some amazing world leaders around the world. Like, I'm just in love with Jacinda Ardern. I really am. I mean, she's incredible. And you see what women can do. And I feel, failed in this country to actually have what I say is a decent female candidate come forward and actually be able to be strong enough to do that without sacrificing their own persona and femininity to be accepted.
Well, you know,
So it's almost a falsehood.
if you look at some of the countries that were handling the COVID situation the best, they all had women leaders.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think that says something.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's come out with what happened in Minneapolis this last week, that Amy Klobuchar, one of the female candidates for the Democratic Party, when the cop who murdered George Floyd previously had killed a person of color, did not have him indicted.
Indigenous person.
And he was an indigenous person. And so this is now coming out as well.
He also has 13 other violations.
Yeah, I know, but this is, sorry, my roommate.
It's okay. I think we all feel very strongly about this.
You know, and we're just watching all this happen. And, you know, I have friends in the Native community there in Minneapolis who have been out every night since this. And one of my friends who is there knew George Floyd, like personally knew him. And so, you know, we're watching all of this. I was literally getting ready to get in the car Friday night, trying to find somebody to go with me and drive to Louisville, when I found my chicken was very sick and had to deal with that.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's just all of this that's going on right now. And
they're literally just in that park.
But yeah, coming out and fighting out that Amy Klobuchar,
they're not,
you know, one of the people who very, very centrist as well, was, she didn't indict him, or, you know, previously to that, is just very telling to me, you know.
Yeah, I think from a lot of what I'm seeing and reading, and, you know, I've tried to follow a lot of this as much as possible just to keep myself educated on what's going on in America. I think what people don't realize, especially over here, because people are seeing even more polarized views over here in the media than over where you are, because it's very select sources coming through, is arresting somebody for this and convicting them are two very different things, and very rarely happen. I mean, the amount of incidents where somebody has been arrested for this kind of thing, and then when you look at that compared to the conviction rate, it is astonishing, the difference.
Yes.
And a big thing, I've seen a lot of people that I know, there's a lot of people in the UK talking about what's going on in America right now. It's everybody's talking about it, which is quite interesting and sometimes positive. But there's the thing that really frustrates me with a lot of white people is they immediately jump on the fact they shouldn't be looting. And I've tried to jump it back at them that this whole situation shouldn't be happening. It's not just the looting, which, whether that, you know, the news stories coming out at the minute that there's a lot of far right coming over, or there's a lot of people not directly involved in what's happening and they're causing the problems or not. If you take that away completely, if your main concern is the looting, that's a problem. It should be the whole situation, surely. None of this should have happened. This is only happening because of the original core issue.
Right, and it's like, you
get to a point that you're just so angry. I mean, I relate to it as somebody who campaigns very heavily for disabled rights, and for the hundreds of thousands of disabled people in this country that have been murdered by our government and economic policy, where they've been starved, they've been removed of their finances, removed of their care support, removed of medication. And I know how angry I feel when I hear more people have died. And I feel that pain in what is happening in America. You know, I know it's different, but that's how I'm relating to it personally, just how angry I get. And at what point, you know, would I turn to that? And it is not far away in some respects. Yeah, but you know, they're my views on that. But if you wanted to speak about that more.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like people are looking at the protests, and complaining about the method. Sorry, I'm gonna go in since there's people talking around here. I'm gonna let them talk so that we're not picking that up on. But you know, people are complaining about the type of protest that's happening, and like, you know, people tried taking a knee at football games, and people complained about that. People tried other forms of peaceful protest, and people complained about that. And then, so it's not the form of protest that's being, you know, it's just that people don't want to support what's the problem, you know. It's a form of protest. Obviously, they're just not getting behind, you know. It's the same as when people are saying, you know, somebody's saying all lives matter when somebody says Black lives matter. Yes. You know, it's like when this house is on fire, I'm going to go put this house out. Well, what about my house? It's not on fire, but don't you care about my house? Well, your house is not on fire, but this house is. Yes. And so, and that's, you know, people have been trying, and, you know, you've got these people who this problem doesn't affect them, and they're like, oh, can't we just go back to the good old days? Well, it wasn't that good. It was maybe good for you because you were comfortable, but it wasn't good for everybody. Black and brown people, that wasn't the good old days for us, you know. And, you know, personally, I'm tired of being told that I have to make my anger and my feelings palatable for white people. And I know that a lot of Black and brown people are feeling that way. Yeah. And, you know, you've got these like white moderates who like to quote Martin Luther King Jr. all the time. And he's the one who said a riot is the language of the unheard. Yeah. And so, you know, I absolutely support the people who are out protesting right now and want to go join with them. But like, as a woman of color, I can't go alone, and I have to find somebody to go with me, which I want to do. But, you know, and I've been watching videos from friends who are there protesting and live streaming, and the way that the police are reacting. I've seen some videos where the police are joining in, and that is great, and I love that. But the way that the police are reacting to these protesters, and there's been a lot of evidence that's come out showing that the police are some of the ones starting the more violent things that are happening, trying to make the people protesting look like the villains in this situation. And the police, you know, are driving their cars through crowds of people. The police, I saw a video in Louisville where the police, there was water bottles set out for the protesters, and the police came up in their riot gear and stood in front of the water bottles while more police were smashing the bottles and dumping them out. I saw a video of police running over a woman with their horse. I've seen videos where people getting shot, journalists being shot and arrested. Like, the police are the ones who are being violent right now. Mm-hmm. And sorry, my cat keeps trying to walk in front of my phone. But yeah, the police are the ones who are being the most violent right now. Yeah. And that's very telling too. And then, like you said, you know, being arrested for something and being convicted of something are two very different things. Mm-hmm. And in the past, you've had instances where police have killed people, you know, and then they, you know, just in my home city of Indianapolis, just this last month, we had 3 Black people killed, one of whom was a pregnant woman walking across the street and was hit by a cop car. Mm-hmm. We had a man who was fleeing from the police, who was shot, and he was live streaming it. The man was live streaming it, and he was shot. Last time I checked, evading police was not a death sentence. Like, that man had a right to a trial. And so, you know, and a lot of times these cops are just being fired, or they're getting sometimes arrested, but then they're being let off. They're not being convicted. They're being fined, but they're not being convicted of what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know, the police who killed Eric Garner, the police who killed Trayvon Martin, they're not being convicted of killing a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy. And that's part of why people are so angry, because this keeps happening.
Yeah.
And Black people keep getting murdered, and brown people keep getting murdered at the hands of police. And people say, well, if they'd been following the law, you know, but these people, even if they were breaking the law, they have the right to a trial in this country.
Yeah. But it isn't always the case. I mean, when you look at how in America the mentality of that section of society have to act, especially in white neighborhoods, in middle class neighborhoods, you know, the fear of going out running is so absurd. It's not even, it's at all levels, you know. It's the fact that you're living in fear, you know. I mean, you told me last time we met about when you were arrested, that time for a $10 check that bounced that you never even knew about. I mean, it's so insane to me that would be happening, but this is not even unusual. So it's at every level the fear starts, and you know, the fear for children, and it's, you know, I don't think a lot of people really get it, and I wouldn't say I get it from a personal experience, but there's a lot of people don't have any idea.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and when that happened to me, you know, thankfully I came out of it alive, but I sat there for 4 days not even knowing why I was there. They didn't even tell me why I was there, in a cell by myself. And then they finally took me to another courthouse, and they took me in front of a judge, and she had a stack of return to sender envelopes in front of her because these notices were being sent to the wrong address. And she said, did you even know about this? And I said, no. And she released me, and I just paid the fine and the charge and everything, and it was dropped. But you know, most people, not most, but some people aren't that lucky. You know, you have Sandra Bland, who was arrested for a broken taillight and ended up dead in her cell. And then people want justice for this. And people are angry, and they're tired, and they're fed up. And that's what you're seeing right now, is people are angry, and they're tired, and they're fed up. Yeah.
And I think the biggest problem is you've got a president right now that's not only unapathetic, he's actually encouraging the violence, encouraging the reactions, and inciting his cult following to act in certain ways and to defend him. I mean, when all that happened outside the White House, he called for his followers to come and defend him. And I just found that so absurd.
Yeah.
And that was even something he's very aware. I feel in some ways he's got a lot of issues, but in some ways he's very aware of the power he holds. And to use that in such a way, in such a high status and responsibility, I just find astounding.
Yeah, and he, on his Twitter, a month ago, not even a month ago, less than a month ago, when you had armed white people coming into the Michigan State House with guns, protesting COVID lockdown, he was tweeting that they were good people. Yeah. And now we have angry people of color out in the streets and angry Black people out in the streets protesting being murdered by the police. And he's tweeting and saying that they're going to be attacked with ominous weapons and vicious dogs if they don't stop. Like, that's so obviously just blatant double standard.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It's I don't understand how it's allowed. I really don't. I think the thing that frustrates me most is there's this, and it's the same here for different issues, there's this core section of people that it doesn't matter what happens, they will blindly support it.
Mm-hmm.
And they will constantly contradict themselves with, in this country with the lockdown, you know, calling for resignations for other party politicians, but blindly defending their own for the same actions. And, you know, and that happens in a variety of things. That's just the current situation. And there's a lot of people who think that is, you know, that they're doing a great job, that everything's fantastic, that everything's been done exactly how it should be. And I really struggle mentally to understand that thought process and that direction. I understand people's variance in politics. I understand people coming from different lifestyles, different backgrounds, their own experiences, and they're voting, whether they're voting for themselves or voting for what they think society should look like or principles that their parents have given. You know, I understand that. I don't understand this new development that both countries have with this cult following of blindly agreeing with, supporting and defending seriously outrageous behavior.
You know, one of the things that I really blew my mind was I found a video on YouTube of a Republican debate from 1980 something of Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. And honestly, if you watch that video and you listen to what they're saying, you would think that it was a Democrat debate from 2020. Because politics have moved so far to the right. I was really shocked. And I knew that when I was a kid, I didn't know a lot about politics. You know, I was born in the 80s. But I know that when I was a kid, my dad voted Republican. And I was, as an adult, struggled to understand how my father, who was a person of color, could vote for Republicans. And watching that video, I understood that a little more because they were so much further left than they are now, because they've moved so extremely far right. And I have a family friend who is my parents' age, who had also been a longtime Republican, and she and I had a conversation once, and she said, I feel like my party has left me. Because she doesn't support all of these things that they are now supporting.
Yeah.
And they have just moved and shifted so far right into this extremist views that you have a lot of people who had previously supported them. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people who have shifted right along with them. And but there are a lot of people who are finding themselves like, I don't know what to do anymore because I feel like things have just moved away from what I value.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's exactly the same over here. When you look at fiscal conservatism, we're no longer in that realm, and you kind of understand that value a little bit more. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand it. I think that's, I think a big problem that I see is there's a lot of people don't understand politics, and that's a broad thing to say, but even people don't understand economics. They don't understand how economics really works. They don't really understand how different countries work and how things can be done differently. And there's a lot of people, I don't know if they just think the people in charge must know what they're doing, so I will believe what they're saying. And for me, I mean, my last video was on my journey in politics, and 10 years ago, my views were vastly different from where they are now. Before I got actively involved in speaking with people in politics and learning about it, you know, I had some views that now I would consider nothing drastic, because I've never been, I'd say, that kind of person, but just my understanding of things like social security in particular and how that works, and experiences of other people and experiences I've had since, and becoming disabled massively influences that, because you're put in a different world to the one you always understood. You can't just get up and go out and work in a field when you need money. You kind of can only do limited amounts of employment, and you've got to, you know, sacrifice certain things. And I don't know, I think we need to educate a lot of people in how things work, but in a way that doesn't make them feel alienated from it.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people in political activism using, you know, even the word privilege. Like, it took me a while to really understand it and to not get offended, because I think there's a big problem with white people that we get very offended straight away, because not all of us have these intentions. But actually, when you break it down and really understand it, I'd accept, you know, various things. And although we have areas that some of us have not experienced privilege, we have certain areas that we don't even realize we are privileged to live within. But I've found that word now turns people off completely if they're not involved in politics. As soon as you start using certain words and certain terminology, you know, there's a lot of people that find that they find that really difficult to understand. And I don't know, we need to break that down, I think. And I think education is key. There's a lot of miseducation going on at the moment and misunderstanding. But then the problem is there's no time now. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. And this is the thing with the protests. It's, what is the solution? We've got to a point that there is no, is there a peaceful solution when the people that could find that solution don't want to listen?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we obviously need change now, but you're absolutely right. You know, the people who could be the ones to make the changes don't want to listen. And it's a very difficult place to be in. And, you know, I think with what we were saying about privilege, my best friend Rachel said something the other day that I thought was really well put, was that, you know, being a white person, you know, she said something like, I don't know what it's like to be Black or brown in the United States. She said, like, you know, it doesn't mean that I haven't struggled, but I'll never know what it's like to be in a room that wasn't built for me.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really well put.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and I agree with that. I think that's the foundation of it, really. And I think people need to talk to people more, and they need to talk to people that are not within their circles. And a big problem with that, as somebody who really is into computers, is algorithms on social media are a really big problem with this, because they circulate what you're talking about and what you're looking at and what you're already doing. So everything you see is confirming your own views. And it spirals it down. And, you know, I think that's a big problem we've got at the minute with, there's a lot of people think everybody thinks the way they think.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's difficult.
One thing that I have been very appreciative of in the last few days with everything going on, though, is that I've had several white friends on my Facebook friends list who, you know, have been doing a lot of emotional labor for Black and brown people in explaining why people are angry. Like, they're not trying to speak for Black and brown people.
Yeah,
but
and that's a key difference, I think.
Yeah. But they're explaining to people who may not understand what's going on. Because, you know, Black people right now are, especially, and brown people as well, are very exhausted emotionally, physically, all of that, mentally. And, you know, like, I have a family friend who had posted something, and there were people in the comments saying things like, well, racism isn't really as big of an issue as you would think it is. And they were coming in and saying, actually it is. You know, here's some examples. And they were kind of doing that hard work instead of, you know, because the people who, like myself, have experienced racism are tired of trying to explain it to people. And I've been very appreciative of allies stepping in and doing that emotional labor for people. but without trying to speak for them.
Yeah.
You know, and just giving examples and giving, you know, doing that for that legwork. And I've been really appreciative of people I've seen in videos at protests who are stepping in between the cops and Black people and being shields, like white shields. I've been very appreciative of that, seeing that coming out as well. Because the police are more likely to hurt a Black protester and less likely to hurt a white protester. And if you have a white person step in between them, they're less likely to do something.
Yeah. Well, we saw that with the CNN news reporter, with the first person that they arrested, and it looked like that's all they were going to do. And it was almost an afterthought that actually we need to arrest you all because otherwise it will be pointed out what we've just done. And
yeah.
I'm lost for words. They're watching that and just, yes, completely. So if we end this on, you've covered some of it now, what would be your advice or suggestions for anyone listening right now that wants to get involved and support what's going on? The best way to do that, and I think you've covered it with not speaking on behalf of a community, and I think that's a really important thing that needs to happen.
Yeah,
but definitely
I'd say listen to Black and brown people, you know, listen to what we have to say, especially listen to Black people right now. And there are a lot of bail funds that you can donate to help bail protesters out of jail. I think that's another way you can help, even because, you know, there's petitions and stuff, but I think that those petitions have to be signed by US citizens. So if you're not, then you wouldn't be able to sign that, but you can at least donate to bail funds and help bail people out.
that's really helpful. And how would people find that, especially over here?
I saw a link I can send you.
That would be great, and I'll put it in the comments in the description of the video.
Yeah. So I'll send you that link.
Brilliant, that's amazing.
Okay.
Thank you. So yeah, I suppose we've been going for quite a while because we both have a lot of views and opinions, and we've kind of covered two subjects in this, but I just felt the first one we'd already planned and the second one just needed to be covered. So for what it's worth, you know, all my heart goes out to you all, it really does. And if I could do anything and can do anything other than what I'm trying to do, or if I'm making any mistakes and doing something I shouldn't be doing, call me out on it. But you know, I've seen a lot of people really trying to educate. I have seen it, people trying to educate others on what's going on, but I hope we can find a way forward. I really do. And I feel it's more prevalent over in the US right now, this feeling of discontent, but it's rising over here. It's just British people really struggle with rebellion. I don't, but British people really struggle with dissent. And I think if it ever happened over here, you know, it's gone above and beyond what it would have ever happened in any other country. We have a real issue with it.
I saw a video of people marching in London with Black Lives Matter signs, and I thought that was so wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. Right, well, thank you very much for agreeing to do this, and hopefully we'll speak soon.
Yes, definitely.
Enjoy your gardening and your chickens.
I will.
All right, thank you.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.